not always as well as we could. We're privileged to have today Liz Butler-Rogers, who is a professional therapist and member of our congregation, Nancy Clark, who's also a professional therapist, Jackie Good, and Debbie Buck, who are not professional therapists, as Jackie just said, but are trainers for the Stephen Ministry, which does such a significant role here at St. Thomas Church to help equip people to be a support to someone going through a major transition or loss in life. And this is a ministry we've had for over 30 years at St. Thomas that has blessed so many people. We want to begin today with Liz will start us out, and then I'll be passing the microphone along off of that cleanup, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers from there. Sound okay? Good. Liz?
I didn't expect it to be so crowded today. Someone said it's because it's cold and there's no electricity, so you're here. Good. All right, so when we talk about communication and conflict resolution, we can talk about it globally, we can talk about it in terms of community. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. I do a lot of family therapy, so I'm going to be talking about communication and conflict resolution interpersonally with relationships. So when people come into my practice, I would say probably 95% of the time people come in and say, I'm having problems with communication, or we have communication problems. And what they think they want to know is how to communicate. And that's really only half of the issue. It's not so much the mechanics of communicating, because that's something, skills are something that are pretty readily acquired and picked up. It's not so much how we communicate, it's what we communicate. It's what we say to ourselves about a problem. So if we're going to be effective in conflict resolution and have healthy communication skills, we really need to reflect on what we are saying to ourselves about the problem, how we're assessing the problem. So there's an easy formula, and I was lazy and didn't do any handouts as opposed to my sisters here who were thorough. Instead, I decided I was going to make it really easy so you could take it out of here pretty quickly. All right, so when we are having a problem, easy, you got to think about ABC. A is the event or the adversity, B is the belief, and C is the consequence. So the consequence could be feelings and behaviors associated with the problem. And thank you to John Rogers for graphics, the art teacher who has fabulous handwriting.
And an English.
Okay, so adversity. The example is friends are meeting for a cocktail. One is chronically late. Her name is Anne. The other friend, Mary, is hurt, is angry. Like the first 30 minutes, she's kind of cold, and then through the evening, she's throwing jabs and is a little critical. Right? So the fact that Anne is chronically late and was late yet again caused Mary to be kind of shut down in the beginning and then kind of cranky and, throwing jabs at her friend through the rest of the evening. Right? Wrong. Wrong. Really, the issue isn't the fact that Anne was late yet again. The issue was what Mary was saying to herself that really informed her behaviors and her feelings. So Anne was late, and what Mary was rehearsing, her narrative was, she's late, I've talked to her, before about this, she continues to be late, she knows it hurts my feelings, she doesn't care, her time is more important than mine, our friendship doesn't mean as much to her as it does to me, right? So that's how she's appraising the situation. That's what she's saying to herself about that situation. So, another person. So when we're having a problem with someone, the most important piece about communication is really taking a step back and reflecting on, what am I saying to myself? What's my narrative? What is my self-talk about this? And we really want to test for accuracy, like rational, like what does the evidence suggest? And we want to look at our own flexibility of thinking. Can I be flexible in my thinking? So, Mary's like, ugh, I'm so annoyed, and she's hurt my feelings. What am I saying to myself about this? Am I personalizing it, or could it be that she's got time management problems, she procrastinates, across the board she's late, it's really not about me. In that case, if I'm looking at that and that feels true to me, I might be annoyed, but I'm not going to spend the whole night perseverating about it and jabbing and being cranky. I'm just going to kind of go on and have the night. And then maybe next time I'll be thinking, Mary will be thinking, you know what, I'm not going to be there on time. I'll come like 15 minutes later, and that way I won't feel so put out. Sometimes, though, just because we're cranky and we're angry and our feelings are hurt doesn't necessarily mean that our beliefs are wrong. So that's why it really takes some time and some discipline to stop for a second and to really be looking at those beliefs. The beliefs might be accurate. I mean, Mary might look at this and say, you know what? Not only is she late all the time, but she, all she does is talk about herself. She never asks about me. I'm always the one reaching out. She's not reaching out. Really, she's kind of like not the best friend. And in that case, I may need to put some distance between us, or I may need to adjust how much emotional investment I'm making in this relationship. But remember, it all rests on going back to that belief system. And that's the first and probably the most critical part of good communication and good conflict resolution, is that I'm really clear about the distress that I'm feeling is accurate, rational, and that I can have some flexibility around how I'm thinking. So, when we are faced with a problem, and we go through that ABC thing that I'm talking about, we have three choices in how we want to deal with it. So anger, we talked about the gospel today, Jesus was really, really mad, something needed to change. So, one of three things. Number one, we have to have an internal change, an internal shift. The second thing that we do is have an external shift. Something needs to change within my environment. The third would be a combination of both. So, in the gospel this morning, Jesus was like, yeah, I don't have a problem. It's the environment, so I'm going to flip over tables and scream and send people out. In the case of Anne and Mary, actually, let me take a different case. Let's say you're in a job and your boss is really hard on you and disrespectful and not boss-like, more jerk-like. So you have a decision to make. You can make a decision to accept it, get out of the job, or somehow stay in the job and see what you can do to change it. If I do a cost-benefit analysis and I decide it makes a lot more sense for me to stay in this job and to find ways to shut out my boss, not personalize it because I get great benefits, I get terrific tuition reimbursement, and I make a great salary, it meets more of my needs to stay in this job. Therefore, I'm not going to expect my boss to be a good guy. I'm going to expect he's going to be a jerk or she's going to be a jerk, and when she is, I have to find ways to cope with it. That would be an internal shift. The external shift would be, I'm getting clinically depressed, I'm getting sick, I'm having frequent colds, my immune system's worn down, I come home, I'm a terrible mom, I'm kicking the dog, I gotta get out 911, I'm quitting. And I'm just going to have to deal with it because this is really dire. That's the external shift. The third one, which is a combination of both, would be then to be like, all right, I got to stay now, but I am going to go and make a behaviorally measurable, concrete list of things that I need to do and go to my boss and say, look, this is what I need, that is what I need. It's not going to be inflammatory, it's going to be evidence-based, it's going to be behavioral, just the facts, ma'am. It's not going to be any embellishments about how this makes me feel. And then I'm going to stay, and I'm going to look for another job. So that would be, so again, the onus is on me. I am not a victim. I've got to really make a decision about when I'm having a conflict with a person, what serves my needs best? And then I advocate for that in an appropriate way. Now, so that's kind of the most important part about good communication and problem solving, is kind of doing that work, and that takes discipline, and sometimes it's counterintuitive, and a lot of the times it's annoying and time consuming, but that's what you have to do. Now let's talk about quickly the mechanics of good communication. This is not working. You said. So, there's a guy named John Gottman. Has anyone ever heard of him? He's awesome. He was an amazing researcher, thank you, from University of Washington, who amassed an enormous amount of data on marriages, on couples. So, about 20 years of research watching couples interact, and he came up with a really, really, really good stuff that is generalized, like you can generalize it to all of us. So he talked about communication problems, 4 of them, that left unchecked, at least with couples, would predict that people get divorced 94% of the time. Now, you all do this, so, it's only when it goes left unchecked. So, but we can do this with all communication, with all interpersonal relationships. So here are 4 things to look out for. Okay, the first one is criticism. Criticism is not a complaint. Criticism is defined that when someone has done something that has upset me, and I talk to them about it, I am talking about their character. I'm essentially assassinating their character. So the husband comes home late from work, wife makes dinner, he comes home late, and she says, "You're late for dinner. What kind of a person does that?" Okay? That's a criticism. A complaint would be, "Wow, I spent a lot of time at dinner, you're late. I'm kind of bummed out about that. I'm discouraged." Okay, so we're not talking about his character, we're talking about his behavior. So good complaining, bad criticism. Really make sure you stick with the behavior and how it affects you. That's number 1. The second, he calls these the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The second horseman of the apocalypse is defensiveness. Defensiveness is when I completely deflect and reject and not take any responsibility to the information that's being offered about me. So, Johnny and I used to share a desk in our old house. I would see clients, he would do paperwork. One time he came into the kitchen and said, "Liz, when you're done with your clients, would you put your charts away?" And I said, "Look who's talking, you're Mr. Clutter," right? That was a defensive response. Instead of, "Wow, you know what, I'm not aware I'm doing that, but absolutely, going forward I will. Let's both of us keep the desk cleaner." So there I didn't necessarily endorse that I keep my charts all over the place, but I listened to him, I let him know he was heard. I didn't do this, by the way, I did the first one. What I should have done. And then, so you can disagree with someone when they're offering you negative feedback, but it doesn't mean that you have to deflect. Look who's talking. That's a deflection. I'm not taking any responsibility there. The third horseman of the apocalypse is probably the most corrosive, and that is contempt. Contempt is measured more by physical communication. So when we're being contemptuous, our goal is to devalue or humiliate the person we're having a conflict with, and that's usually measured with eye rolling, sneering, sarcasm, or kind of hyperbolic manipulation. And I hear this one all the time. The wife goes to the husband, "I'm unhappy, we need to talk, maybe we need to go into some marital therapy." And the husband says, "Fine, why don't you just get divorced?" So what that wife learns is, "I could never offer anything, critical again." His job was to manipulate her and to make her feel small. Contempt is bad. Eye rolling, oh my gosh, you can be really careful not to do that. To eye roll, and we all do it, right? Either in front of them or behind their backs. Last one is stonewalling. And stonewalling is measured, Gottman actually provoked couples to have fights and would wire them up with biofeedback machines and blood pressure. Stonewalling was a physiological and psychological separation from the problem. He's out of town, he's gone, he's on Jupiter, she's left the room. That also is really destructive. So it's basically when I'm discouraged, I don't care, and I'm done. I'm not in this fight, I'm detached from the problem I've left. Okay? So really, really watch out for those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Okay, so just some tricks of the trade in terms of some really quick pointers. Number 1, soft startup. Gottman talks about that as well. And I'm reluctant to talk to women about this because women have a difficult time talking about their anger, more so than men generally. I'm not going to generalize, but I find that to be generally true. So I don't want, I'm reluctant to have people dummy down what they're saying, so it's not really that. It's just really emotionally intelligent ways to offer bad news. So if I can offer something positive that's legit first, to open those doors, to not throw that wall up, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to speak as tentatively as I can. So I can give it an example. Okay, yeah, let's say that husband coming home late again. So wife says, I really appreciate the fact you're working so hard, and I know it's tough. Do you think, like, I'm just noticing you're coming home later and later. Is there a way we can work that out? So she's getting her message across without, like, kicking him, so he throws up a wall. So soft startup. It's kind of a lot of work, but it really helps. Watch out for the absolutes. Try to strike the words never and always from our talk, from our conversation. And again, we want to speak exquisitely accurate as much as we can. So always and never are almost never true. Lastly, this is really important. When someone's annoyed you and hurt your feelings, don't ask them why they've done their behavior. So instead of, why did you do that? Because basically, when you're asking someone why, you're really asking them to self-indict, right? Well, I did it because I'm a jerk, you know, or because I'm thoughtless and not feeling. No, it's not important. Like, a truer response would be, make your statement. You know, don't worry about why. That's their side of the street. Make your statement. You were late again for dinner, and I'm really hurt. You don't have to say, why were you late? Because then the why is going to, if they're not being indicted, if you're not the prosecutor, the explanation will come, and hopefully an offer of support that your feelings are. That's it, in a quick nutshell.
Thank you so much, Liz.
That was very, very helpful. I'll pass it over to Nancy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Clark, and like Liz, I'm a psychotherapist. And I've worked in various settings, including jails and drug treatment centers and community health centers. Unlike Liz, I have not worked much with couples or families. And I have 2 things that are going to tie in with what Liz said that are much more general when you're trying to communicate with somebody and avoid conflict. And the first is probably pretty self-evident, but not easy to do, is to be as non-judgmental as possible. Because, and that goes with a lot of what she said up there. Because as soon as the other person feels judged, they are going to pretty much just shut down. And that will cause your conflict. And if you're honest and accepting, then they will feel respected and heard, and your conflict will be less. And one thing I've learned that's very important, and I think Liz addressed this, I'm speaking more generally. When you say something and the other person doesn't understand it, or they give you a response that shows that they don't understand or misunderstood what you said, it's your responsibility to try to say it in a way that they can hear it. And that can take several tries. But I have found that to be very crucial. As I said, it's not their responsibility, it's yours. To work hard to make sure they understand what you're saying. And I mentioned my work in drug centers simply because it's such a big issue nowadays with the opioid addiction. And so I'll just say a couple things. I feel great sympathy for both the person with the addiction and the family. Again, a non-judgmental attitude is very, very important and central if you're trying to help or communicate with anybody in that situation. And I really urge anybody that is dealing with this situation to educate yourself about what addiction really is and the meaning. And that's going to take work on your part. And it's going to take work to find sources that really address that. Because so much is out there that's just not true. The last thing I want to say is that if anybody in our church family, if anybody out there is dealing with this truly horrific problem, please feel free to just talk to me. I won't be your therapist, but I'm happy to talk to you and share what I know. Because, as I said, I do understand how painful it is. Now, before I pass it on, we do have a list of books here. The first one I recommend is about addiction, Beautiful Boy, written by the father of a child with a very serious addiction. And this guy writes for the New York Times. It is a phenomenally well-written book, very easy to understand. Oh, sorry. Okay, should I say that again, or did you all hear me? The next one is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Now, there's nobody out here, I think, that has little kids, but if you know anybody that needs it, I see this. I highly suggest it. Again, very easy to understand, very practical. And then they also have one that says How to Talk So Teens Will Listen, and Listen So Teens Will Talk. And my final book, this has to do with couples, it's called Hold Me Tight. So anybody that's interested in communication with couples, I highly recommend this book. Okay, thank you.
In Stephen Ministry, we're going to, Deb and I, talk more about not so much one-on-one conflict, but how we hope Stephen Ministry can help prevent that, and communication in the context of community. When the bishop was here some months ago, he opened with pain that is not transformed is transmitted. So we hope by, in Stephen Ministry, having one-on-one support at a difficult time, we can help transform that pain, be present with you as things pass. We are active listeners, we are one-on-one, we are not therapists, we are not going to give advice. Now, sometimes in the context of the church life, there are different kinds of conflict in the community. And the founder of Stephen Ministry, the book that I'm working with, is Antagonists in the Church. He also relied heavily on Speed Lees, who is affiliated with Duke Divinity and did a lot of work on conflict in the church. And the thing he points out here that may be useful to us as a community is when there is conflict within the community, it might be useful to us to discern what kind of conflict that is. So many of us hate and avoid conflict at all costs. I'm one of them, I get that. But in the church, there is a time, in any actually organization and in families even, we we may experience conflict as it's starting as criticism or comment. That's not the worst thing that can happen because it's all out front. The next stage we may observe or experience is conflict in the context of a protagonist or an activist. This is someone who you may experience conflict with them, but they're really working on an issue. It's not directed toward anything negative, even though it may feel that way to you. Then the third thing that Haug talks about is an antagonist, which he defines very specifically. And that's someone who is not attacking or trying to change an issue, they're going at it personally. Antagonists are individuals who, on the basis of non-substantive evidence, go out of their way to make insatiable demands, usually attacking the person or performance of others. These attacks are selfish in nature, tearing down rather than building up, and often directed against those in leadership. Now, the reason I think that's a valuable thing to think about, as unpleasant as it may be, because your communication style is going to be different. If this is someone that it's an activist who's trying to persuade you or talk to you about an issue, that's a different way of communicating than someone who's really communicating to make trouble. Most of Haug's materials were written pretty long ago, so I think now we would probably say someone toxic. So when we would want to be more straightforward and forthcoming with regular conflict, with antagonists, we would approach it differently. And we won't go all into that today because it's not appropriate. But the thing to remember about it that I learned from Haug is that this is when community is especially valuable because you're not alone in doing this. If you're a person who's experienced a difficult person, it's really essential to communicate with clergy and other church leaders in order to evaluate, is this a problem person, a problem situation, and how do we want to communicate? You don't want to do this by yourself. And you shouldn't. We are a community. So I thought this was extremely valuable. We have seen churches close because the antagonist was driving the train. So if it's dealt with appropriately and positively by a team of people who with each other are completely forthcoming but are more deliberate in how they communicate with the person, it can save a church, and it can certainly save individuals in the church from a really difficult time. One thing he says that he's quoting a 16th century reformer, Philip Melanchthon. Nothing can be stated so perfectly as to not be misunderstood. The other thing that Lees talks about that's good to remember is conflict is neutral. Conflict in itself doesn't have meaning until we assign that meaning to it. So those are some good things to bear in mind. And with that, turn it to Deb.
Hi, my name is Debbie Buck, and professionally, I'm a nurse practitioner. I work for a psychiatrist, and I see patients in long-term care settings and assisted living that may be adjusting to long-term care, may have a history of depression. They could be bipolar or schizophrenia, and sometimes they have to help families with voluntary commitments to a behavioral health unit in one of our local hospitals. I had the privilege of going with Jackie to St. Louis last spring, I guess, when we did our training for Stephen ministers. And then we came back and did sessions during the summer through the fall with 5 new Stephen ministers and 1 returning Stephen minister, and things are going well. We have plenty of people in need, I think. So one of the things about being a Stephen minister is to have the opportunity for inner healing and transformation for the one being cared for and also for the one who cares. Caregiving can be a call to mutual spiritual presence for everyone. It can inspire private caregivers and care receivers to consider a new view about caring, and that it's one that is full of hope and promise. We're transforming things such as loss into wisdom. We'll have the love of God, which comforts and sustains us through all the many life challenges that we all endure. Love seems to be stronger than death, and so Stephen ministers hope to transform expression of despair and grief into Confidentiality is extremely important. When we have our monthly supervisory meetings, we do not mention the name of the person who is receiving care from the care person. We don't mention any names whatsoever. It's important for us to establish trust, our listening skills, and as everybody has already said, non-judgmental kind of attitude. You've got the opportunity to form a relationship maybe with someone in the church that you didn't really know and have positive outcomes for, basically for both of you, and enriching the experience that you've had with one another. The support of colleagues and loving friends, our church community is necessary, and I don't think we should be afraid to ask for help or reluctant to claim it. Our culture primarily values assent, things going up like the stock market going up, our GNP, profit margins, and we get a little anxious when things start to go south like our 401ks. So St. Thomas, I think, is improving and always transforming. We're always getting better, and we rise above all the consequences and troubles that we face in life. Stephen Minister's attempt to help people in that well of grief, where we're among forgotten ancestors, abandoned dreams, and lead people to a place where each of us return in this life that is gifted to us for such a short period of time. So the conflict I see that mostly Stephen ministers are dealing with is the conflict of loss of jobs, friends, employment, and moving on to all the emotional issues they're dealing with: anger, frustration, and even feeling less guilty when they finally can return to some happiness and not feel guilty about being happy again. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb, Jackie, Nancy, and Liz. Just about to clean up with a few thoughts here that a lot of what I end up doing is premarital counseling, is going over some of these things, because I tell people their ability to communicate, and especially to deal with anger, will not necessarily ensure that they have a great marriage, but if they can't succeed in finding a working style, it will ensure that they get divorced. So it's one of those crucial areas which we have to come together in a relationship to really make work. One of the things I do with couples in premarital counseling is I give them some exercises to do or homework and to bring back the answers. And one thing I do is I always ask them to write down 20 things you love about each other, 5 reasons why this is a good time in your life to be getting married, and 1 thing you change about the other if you could. And it has to be something you could actually change, not like, I wish he were 7'3" and a basketball player, because I always wanted to marry someone 2 feet taller than me. But, you know, I wish that he would be more punctual, or I wish that she would, you know, wouldn't be so spontaneous at times, and give me some forewarning, things like that. And so they go through their list and they read these aloud in my office, and then I ask, how do you feel after hearing that? And if John read his list, I'd say, maybe, how does that make you feel? Maybe it's that, it makes me feel great. And then maybe reads her list. John, how did you feel? I feel wonderful. And then when we get down to the 5 items are always just classic. I'm looking for, have they dated long enough? Do they know each other's families? Are they thinking about starting a family of their own? Are they in a financially strong enough position to do this? Things like that. Then the 1 thing I have them bring up. And after 20 blessings, they can almost always hear that 1 thing that would be negative. And say, well, you know, I understand that, and we've talked about that before, and I'm working with it. And what I'm trying to do is create a pattern from this get-go, 20 blessings for every 1 criticism. When I did this many years ago, I used to do 10 things you love about each other, 5 reasons why this is a good time in your life to be getting married, 3 things you change about it if you could. And I read in a book on marriage that if you ever get to 30 to 40% of your comments are critical, you've entered a toxic stage of your relationship. I think most of us can recall a time in our marriage or our relationship, it could be even just with someone we're in school with or at work, where we find ourselves becoming hypercritical. Oh yeah, I hate this too. Or, why do you always leave your coffee cup out on the table in the living room. It just drives me nuts. And that gives someone else permission to come back at us and say something negative the same way. So bear that in mind. If you think about blessing someone 20 times for every one negative thing you bring up, it'll absolutely change the dynamic. Number two is we all carry what's called free-floating anxiety within us. It's like a cotton candy that's just looking for something else to latch onto. Our nation is full of this right now. And I view it as almost like Velcro. And we're looking for something to stick. So a thing that used to drive me crazy is if a motorists were driving way too fast and I came by my car and just almost cut me off. That would just set me off. And I would flash my lights several times. I might even try to catch up with them. So I was being instructive with my own behavior that what you did was not good. Their behavior immediately caught that free-floating anxiety within me. We all have something like that within us. What happens is when it gets triggered or caught, we go on an emotional journey. There I go getting, the breath of someone else's behavior. There I am being abandoned once again. I'm not a good person. We go on an emotional journey. Usually we have the same journey, we just keep repeating over and over again. But in that moment when you sense you're about to go on it, you can just say, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to let that bother me. I'm not going to take that journey. What you end up doing is you starve that free-floating anxiety within you and shrink it from a big bundle of cotton candy to something that's barely a speck. And it's a very good learned exercise. In terms of styles of conflict, some classic ones are the flamethrower, the negotiator, we need to talk about this, the silent type, and you just distance yourself. Then I might add the gunny sacker, who keeps storing the stuff like in a big Christmas sack, like St. Nicholas. And one day something sets you off and you just start bringing out one little gift, so to speak, after another, things that have set you off over the years. In a relationship, classically, there's not, the flamethrowers are always the ones who get divorced. Sometimes they aren't. If you have a neighbor on your left side of your house that you can hear them fight aloud and they keep the windows open, you're thinking, there they go again. They're going to get divorced one day. I swear it's going to happen. And the next couple, you barely know, they're just silent. One day you go out to fetch your paper in the front yard or in the driveway, and you see a moving van by the house on your right, the silent type. And you ask one of them, I haven't seen Chip around in a while. Oh, Chip's moving out. We're getting a divorce. They've never found a way to deal with their conflict. Absolutely silent. So it's not like there's one preferred method where there's a flamethrower, negotiator, silent type, but you have to find a style that works for you. Otherwise, with each fight, instead of kind of rebounding, get upset, you pull back a bit, which then you come back together. You just keep distancing until you are like living in different worlds. The learned behaviors, mostly this comes from the family of our origin. We've watched how our parents fight. And we just model that. If you had a parent who would fly off the hotel, you're staying in a hotel and call room service to have something, let's say the air conditioner fixed, or call the front desk. And the third time you watch the parent say, God damn it, get up here and fix the, blah, blah, blah. You watch that as a child. You take that in. The next thing you're a 35 or 40-year-old adult, you're mimicking the same behavior. So we not only have learned behavior, but we have to unlearn that behavior and say, I'm now more conscious of how I act. I have to stop doing that. Women and men hear things differently. So if a man raises his voice a bit, a woman or a daughter can hear that as yelling. The guy said, I'm not yelling. Let me tell you what yelling's like. Well, they've heard that as well. And because it's learned behavior, we need to remember that even when we're 90, our children are still taking notes. They're watching how we deal with stuff. So we never stop modeling that. And the more we can get into a healthy level of communicating and dealing with criticism and conflict, we are showing our children a roadmap for the future. I think it's the greatest gift we can give them. Much more than the finest education, much more than stashing away money for them or buying them a car when they turn 16. Model for them what a really good marriage looks like. In terms of conflict, it's, you know, if you're dealing with continued conflict with someone, I recommend you pray for them. Just keep in your prayer book, and I hope you all have a book of common prayer at home, that you say the morning prayer office or the evening prayer office every day. It's a great, great spiritual activity to do. And you can do it, and Liz and I can help you. Starlet Hellebusch is big on this. We can help you find a way to do that literally 10 or 15 minutes a day. And it's a great, great gift to you and all of your relationships. But put on that index card special concerns for prayer, and put the person who's driving you nuts. Put that name there and pray for that person every day. It will start to transform the way you're relating to that person. You're calling down blessings upon them. And you're asking God to help you understand that person better. And do a little bit of scriptural reading a day, a little bit of Bible, and you'll find that throughout it, people are being forgiven. And you realize when saying the Lord's Prayer every day that we cannot be forgiven unless we're willing to extend that gift to others. And remember, that includes the person who's driving you absolutely nuts on a repeated basis. The presenting problem is not always the real problem. So if someone comes at you with an issue, bear in mind, and they teach us this in counseling, it's often not that. So if someone makes an appointment to talk to me about why should we be using styrofoam cups in the Sunday Faith Forum every Sunday? It's driving me nuts. Well, first of all, we use paper, so that issue doesn't come up a lot. But it's often because they feel like I don't pay attention to them. Or they're feeling unappreciated at St. Thomas Church. It's not the presenting problem, but it's something behind that. So just keep your antenna up for that. In terms of vulnerability, there's no place we're probably more vulnerable than in a marriage or in a parenting situation, because we spend so much time together with that person. But that person is our ultimate gift. And if we listen to the criticism and things, we can realize this is someone who is just trying to help me be the person God has always intended for me to be. In terms of being an introvert and extrovert, it matters a lot. Introverts process internally. Sometimes they say, we've talked about this many times. Have we really? You've talked to yourself about this many times. But we haven't actually had this conversation. An extrovert will tell, the entire office before the spouse has maybe even let anyone in her family know that they're expecting a baby. So how we share information in the realm of privacy is viewed very differently between introverts and extroverts. An introvert will recharge by some quiet time, downtime. An extrovert by going out to a party where there'll be 50 wonderful people like you that we can spend the evening together. And bear in mind how that plays out in a relationship. Friday night is a time to just try to renew ourselves after a long week. If the extrovert said, let's go to the party, and the introvert agrees, the introvert may be giving the spouse a silent treatment on their way home. Why? Because he essentially asked me to work overtime after 5 long, really tough days. And I really prefer to just go home, rented a movie on Netflix and pop some popcorn and just relaxed. So just bear in mind how that plays out in relationships. Thinking, feeling does as well on the Myers-Briggs. It's the only thing that's gender-based on the Myers-Briggs exam is that 2/3 of men come out thinking, 2/3 of women are feeling. And so when the spouse says, I've just got a promotion, we can move to Chicago, I'm taking over the office, the other spouse may say, wow, I feel like this is great for you, but this is really a bad time. I'm 6 months pregnant, I have a great OBGYN, and you're so good at what you're doing, I feel like you'll get asked to do this again. And the spouse says, no, the Chicago office is the best office. It only comes open like every 10 years. I think this is the time. I know you're pregnant and all that, but I think, and then you say, I think I feel, they talk right past each other. Adult children of alcoholics internalize criticism. So when you say you're late, what they hear is you're a bad person. Bear in mind, again, how we're raised in the situation impacts how we hear things. One key thing is never triangulate. By triangulating, If I'm upset with Jackie, I talk to Debbie about it. I don't talk to Jackie. We often triangulate with our children. We tell them something that we really need to tell our spouse. And that's just unhealthy behavior. In owning your behavior, you can often do, it's sometimes called fogging, but you just, someone say, you know, if your spouse turns to you in the bathroom and says, "You're a slob." I say, "Well, sometimes I am a slob. What makes you say that now?" "Well, you just left that little thing with toothpaste and it's going to harden me. It's going to break my nail off, probably trying to get it after a day or two." But if you own a little of that, and then you get them, "What makes you say that now?" You realize it's just one little thing that they're bringing up. It's not like, "You're a slob in every area of your life. I hate you." It's just, let's get some clarification, but own some of that. If you ever swear, mock, use sarcasm, you immediately move out of the realm of rational to irrational discourse. So fair fighting rules are never mock, never swear, never roll the eyes, as you say. In terms of most couples fight about 5 major things. What are they? I always ask the couples in premarital counseling, because if they can name one, I know they're ready to get married. If they can't, if they can only name one, I say no wonder. But they fight about money, sex, children, extended family, and religion. And most of us will have one of those areas that we'll predictably keep fighting about in our relationship. If we do, it's good to get what I call pastoral first aid. Go to talk to someone about that to see, can we avoid that being a battleground for the next 50 years of our life? A counselor I once asked, I said, "What's the hardest thing to get a couple through in their marriage? Is it the loss of a child? Is a high divorce rate following the death of a child? Or is it infidelity? Or is it an addiction? Or is it workaholism or depression?" Do you know what the counselor said to me? I was thinking about these as varieties of cancer. What's the most deadly? The counselor said it's really none of those in particular. It's how long they've let that issue go on before they've gotten some help. So if you had to go to the doctor tomorrow and the doctor said you have cancer, how many of us would say, "Thank you for sharing that, I appreciate it. This is March. I've got a really busy 6 months. I'm going to come back in 6 months. If it's still there, let's talk and we'll figure out how to treat it." Everyone say, "What do I need to do?" Right away. And if they said, the physician said, we can't perform the surgery for 2 months, I'll be on vacation, my colleagues will be on vacation, you would find another physician, you'd get it tackled and dealt with right away. But in our relationships, we say, well, maybe this will go away. Maybe this will get better. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And what we often do is we wait until it's too late. So the advice I always give to people is go early, go together, go to someone good. And lastly, I just say that we all function in one way when we're calm, relaxed. It can be a win-win, okay? Win-win. I want to make this work for you, I want to make it work for me. But when we're under stress, we can also go to win-win. So one of us has to win here, or fight or flight, all sorts of different behaviors because of the stress that we're under. So having said that, let's just open it up to questions to any of the folks here, any of the things you've heard. Feel free to just raise question if you have some thoughts. Yes?
I have 3 questions.
Josh, go.
First, what is the cost of this session per hour? And secondly, can we apply that cost to our insurance deductible? And 3, if not, or even if so, could we increase our yearly pledge in that percentage?
Love that question. Thank you for tithing. And, Barbara.
Just a couple of things. One is I was a recipient of the Stephen Minister back when I first married presented. I was very reluctant to have one, and somebody was fantastic. And it was great, and I'm really glad that I did. So I would encourage anybody to keep your hands on it. The other thing is that one thing was very memorable. When my daughter was about 6, she turned to me and I barked at her for something. She turned to me and she said, "Why are you speaking to me as if you don't love me?" And that changed my life. It changed my parenting because talk to one another about issues we have with one another. It's always, this one tells me, this one said this. So we really could do some work on that. It's a perennial problem.
That's a really good point. Constantly we hear people say if they have a concern in the church, instead of going to see one of the clergy, if they have a concern with them or a member of the staff, oh, could you tell so-and-so? No, you tell them directly, call them, say it in a nice way. But that's the better way, go directly to that person. Yes. And in terms of being the most critical people will almost always be the most love deprived. Just bear that in mind. If you find someone who is constantly harping against something, or against one thing after another, you will find someone who is just absolutely not experiencing love. If you can just remember that and try to work with that, it can help a lot. Questions or thoughts? Thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you, panelists, for being here. We really appreciate it.